The morning sun was barely up when the boy stepped out of his small apartment. He was only 12 years old, but the look in his eyes carried something much older. Something heavy. Something determined. His name was Tobiah, and today was the day he had been waiting for his entire life. He lived with his mother in a two-room apartment on the east side of Atlanta, in a neighborhood where police sirens sang louder than birds. The walls of their home were thin. You could hear everything: arguments from next door, music from downstairs, the constant drip of a faucet that nobody ever came to fix. But none of that mattered to him today. Today, he had somewhere important to be. His mother had already left for work. She worked 2 jobs, one at a laundromat during the day and another cleaning office buildings at night. He barely saw her anymore. Most days, she would leave before he woke up, and by the time she came home, he was already asleep. But she always left him something. A note on the kitchen table. A sandwich wrapped in plastic. $1 or $2 for the bus. This morning, there was no dollar. She probably forgot. Or maybe she just did not have it. He understood. Money was always tight. It had been that way for as long as he could remember. His father had left when he was 4. He did not remember much about him. Just a voice. A laugh. And then, silence. But today was not a day to think about what he did not have. Today was about what he could become. He grabbed the flyer from the table. He had found it a week ago, taped to the window of a music shop downtown. It was bright yellow with big black letters that read, "Hartwell Academy of Music, open auditions. All ages welcome." The words had stopped him cold. He had read them over and over again, standing there on the sidewalk, until the shop owner came out and asked if he was okay. All ages welcome. That meant him too. The Hartwell Academy was famous. Everyone knew it. Some of the best musicians in the country had walked through its doors. Concert pianists, symphony performers, award winners. It was the kind of place where dreams were made, and also the kind of place that felt 1,000 miles away from his world. But something inside him would not let go of that flyer. He had folded it carefully and kept it under his pillow. Every night, he looked at it before he fell asleep, and every night, he told himself the same thing. You have to try. You have to go. So here he was, standing outside his apartment building in clothes that did not fit right. His shirt was too big, a faded blue button-up that used to belong to someone else before it ended up in the donation bin at church. His pants were a little too short, showing his ankles. His shoes had a hole near the toe, which he had covered with a piece of cardboard from a cereal box. It was not much, but it kept the cold out. He did not have a backpack. He did not have an instrument. He did not have anything except the flyer in his pocket and a heart full of hope. The walk to the academy was long, 6 miles. He could not afford the bus, so he walked, one step after another. Through his neighborhood, past the corner store where old men played cards, past the barber shop with the spinning pole, past the church where he had first heard music that made him feel something he could not explain. As he walked, the streets began to change. The cracked sidewalks turned smooth. The graffiti-covered walls became clean brick buildings. The cars parked along the road got nicer, shinier. People dressed differently here. They walked faster. They did not look at him. By the time he reached the academy, his feet were aching, but he forgot all about the pain the moment he saw the building. It was huge. White columns stood at the front like something out of a movie. Glass doors sparkled in the sunlight. A golden sign above the entrance read Hartwell Academy of Music in elegant letters. There were parents and children walking in and out, all of them carrying instrument cases. Violins, cellos, flutes. They moved like they belonged here, like they had always belonged here. He stood at the bottom of the steps and just stared. For a moment, he thought about turning around. Who was he kidding? He did not belong in a place like this. He did not have lessons. He did not have fancy clothes. He did not have a parent to walk him in and tell him everything would be okay. But then he remembered something. Something an old woman had told him once. A woman named Miss Ruthie, who volunteered at the community center near his home. She had taught him how to play piano on an old broken instrument with 14 keys that did not work. She used to sit beside him for hours, guiding his fingers, humming along to the melodies he created. And one day, she had looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "Boy, you got something special. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different." He took a deep breath, then another. Then he walked up those steps. The moment he stepped inside, everything felt different. The air smelled like polish and perfume. The floors were so shiny he could see his reflection. A huge chandelier hung from the ceiling, glittering like 100 tiny stars. There was soft music playing somewhere in the distance. Classical, beautiful. The kind of music that made you stop and listen. A security guard stood near the entrance. He was a big man, with a serious face. He looked at the boy from head to toe. His eyes stopped at the hole in his shoe, at the too big shirt, at the lack of an instrument case. "Can I help you?" the guard asked. His voice was not unkind, but it was not warm either. "I am here for the audition," the boy said. He tried to keep his voice steady, but it came out smaller than he wanted. The guard raised an eyebrow. "You got a parent with you?" "No, sir. It is just me." "You got an instrument?" "No, sir. I was hoping to use one of theirs." The flyer said pianos would be provided. The guard looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the boy's eyes. A quiet fire. A stubborn hope that refused to be put out. The guard had seen a lot of kids come through these doors over the years. Rich kids, privileged kids, kids who had everything handed to them on a silver plate. But something about this one was different. "Wait here," the guard finally said. He walked over to a woman sitting behind a fancy desk and whispered something to her. She looked over at the boy. Her face was hard to read. Then she nodded. The guard came back. "Go to the front desk. She will give you a number." The boy felt his heart jump. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." He walked to the desk, his worn-out shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The woman handed him a small piece of paper with a number on it. 147. "You will be the last one," she said. "Take a seat in the waiting area." He nodded and walked toward the room she had pointed to. As he pushed open the door, he saw them. Dozens of kids his age, maybe younger, maybe older, all of them dressed in clothes that probably cost more than his mother made in a month. All of them surrounded by parents who fussed over them, fixed their hair, whispered words of encouragement, and then there was him, alone, poor, unknown, but he was here. Against all odds, he was here. He found an empty seat in the corner, clutched his number in his hand, and waited for his turn to show the world what he was made of. The waiting room was like nothing he had ever seen before. Soft leather chairs lined the walls. A thick carpet covered the floor, the kind that swallowed the sound of footsteps. Crystal vases filled with fresh flowers sat on small tables, and through the tall glass windows, he could see the auditorium where a grand piano sat on stage under bright lights. It was the most beautiful piano he had ever laid eyes on. Black and shiny, like it had been carved from the night sky itself. Tobiah found a seat in the far corner, away from everyone else. He held his number tight in his hand. 147. The last one. He did not mind. He had waited his whole life for a moment like this. A few more hours meant nothing, but as he sat there, he began to feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. It was not the silence. It was the stares. A woman in a cream-colored dress looked at him from across the room. Her eyes moved slowly over his faded shirt, his too short pants, the worn edges of his shoes. She whispered something to her husband, a tall man in a gray suit, and they both glanced his way. The woman shook her head slightly, like she had just seen something unpleasant. A boy, sitting a few chairs away, stared at him without shame. He was about the same age as Tobiah, maybe a year older. He wore a perfectly pressed white shirt and a bow tie. His hair was combed neatly to the side. A violin case rested on his lap like a prized trophy. "Mom," the boy said, not even trying to lower his voice. "Why is he here?" His mother, A woman with pearls around her neck and rings on every finger leaned in and whispered something back. The boy laughed. It was a short, cruel laugh, the kind that was meant to be heard. Tobiah looked down at his hands. His fingernails were clean. He had made sure of that this morning, scrubbing them until they were spotless. But his hands still looked rough. There were small calluses on his fingertips from years of pressing down on stubborn piano keys. Keys that stuck. Keys that never made the right sound no matter how hard he tried. He thought about the piano at the community center. It was old, beaten up. 14 of its keys did not work at all. Miss Ruthie used to joke that it had more problems than a math test, but it was the only piano he had ever known, and somehow, he had learned to love it. Miss Ruthie had found him one afternoon when he was 8 years old. He had wandered into the community center to escape the heat, and there it was. This broken-down piano sitting in the corner of a dusty room. He had never touched a piano before, but something pulled him toward it. He sat down and pressed a key. The sound that came out was weak and off-pitch, but it was enough. It was magic. From that day on, he came back every chance he got. Miss Ruthie noticed. She was an old woman, with gray hair and kind eyes. She walked with a cane and moved slowly. But her mind was sharp as ever. She had played piano when she was younger, back before life got hard and her fingers got stiff. She could not play much anymore, but she could still teach. And so she did. Every afternoon, she sat beside him and showed him where to put his fingers, how to read the notes, how to feel the music instead of just hearing it. She brought him old books, filled with songs from composers he had never heard of, Chopin, Beethoven, Bach, names that felt strange on his tongue at first but soon became familiar friends. She never asked for anything in return. She just believed in him. And that belief had carried him all the way here, to this waiting room full of people who looked at him like he did not belong. The hours passed slowly. One by one, the kids were called into the auditorium to perform. Each time a number was announced, a flurry of activity followed. Parents would stand, fix their child's clothes, offer last-minute advice. Remember to smile. Do not rush the second movement. We are so proud of you. Come, Lent. Tobiah watched it all in silence. No one fixed his collar. No one told him they were proud. But he did not feel sorry for himself. He had learned a long time ago that self-pity was a waste of energy. It did not change anything. It did not make life easier. The only thing that mattered was what you did with what you had. A girl about his age sat down a few seats away from him. She had dark curly hair and carried a flute case. Her dress was fancy, covered in tiny flowers, but her eyes were different from the others. Softer, less judgmental. She glanced at him, and for a moment, their eyes met. "You nervous?" she asked quietly. Tobiah blinked, surprised that anyone was speaking to him. "A little," he admitted. "Me too," she said. "I always get nervous before I play. My hands shake and everything." He looked at her. She did not seem like the type to be nervous. She looked like she had done this 100 times before. "You will do great," he said. It felt like the right thing to say. She smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Thanks. You too." Then her number was called, and she stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the auditorium. At the door, she turned back and gave him a small wave. Then she was gone. That tiny moment of kindness stayed with him. It reminded him that not everyone in this room was against him. Not everyone saw him as less than. Some people just saw him as another kid trying to chase a dream. But the kindness was short-lived. A few minutes later, a group of boys gathered near the water fountain. They were older, maybe 14 or 15. One of them pointed at Tobiah and said something that made the others laugh. The words were muffled, but the meaning was clear. They were laughing at him. At his clothes. At his presence. At the idea that someone like him could ever belong in a place like this. Tobiah kept his eyes forward. He did not flinch. He did not react. He had faced worse. He had been teased before. Called names. told he would never amount to anything. The words used to hurt. They used to keep him up at night. But somewhere along the way, he had built a wall around himself. Not a wall of anger. A wall of focus. A wall that kept the noise out and the music in. He closed his eyes and began to play the piano in his mind. It was something Miss Ruthie had taught him. When you cannot get to a piano, she used to say, let the piano come to you. Imagine the keys beneath your fingers. Hear the notes in your head. Let the music live inside you. And so he did. Right there in that waiting room, surrounded by whispers and laughter, he played. Not out loud, not for anyone else to hear, just for himself. The melody of Chopin's Ballade. No one filled his mind, note by note, measure by measure. His fingers twitched slightly in his lap, pressing invisible keys. His breathing slowed, the noise around him faded. There was only the music. When he finally opened his eyes, the room had emptied out. Most of the other kids had already performed. The sun outside had shifted, casting long golden shadows across the floor. A voice crackled over the intercom. Number 147. Please report to the auditorium. His heart stopped for a second. Then it began to pound. Hard and fast, like a drum in his chest. This was it. The moment he had walked 6 miles for. The moment he had dreamed about every night for a week. The moment that could change everything. He stood up slowly. His legs felt weak, but he forced them to move. He walked toward the auditorium doors, his worn-out shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. A few people still lingered in the hallway. They watched him pass, some with curiosity, some with doubt, some with barely hidden amusement. But he did not look at them. He kept his eyes on the doors ahead, on the light spilling out from inside, on the piano waiting for him on that stage. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The auditorium was bigger than he had imagined. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched out before him, climbing upward like a mountain. Tall windows lined the walls, letting in streams of afternoon light that fell across the floor like golden ribbons. And there, at the center of the stage, sat the piano. The grand piano he had seen through the glass doors. Up close, it was even more beautiful. Even more terrifying. Tobias stood frozen at the entrance for a moment. His feet did not want to move. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. The auditorium was not full, but there were still people scattered across the seats, parents who had stayed to watch other performances, a few kids who had already finished their auditions, staff members standing near the walls with clipboards in their hands, and at the front, sitting behind a long table covered with papers, were the judges. 3 of them, 2 men and 1 woman. They looked serious, important. The kind of people who had spent their whole lives surrounded by music and excellence. The kind of people who could spot a fake from a mile away. He took a deep breath and started walking. The aisle seemed to stretch forever. Each step felt heavier than the last. His shoes made soft squeaking sounds against the polished floor. And he was suddenly aware of how loud they were, how out of place they sounded in this grand space. A man sitting near the aisle glanced up as he passed. The man was wearing an expensive watch and a suit that probably cost more than everything Tobias owned combined. He looked at the boy with raised eyebrows. Then he leaned over to the woman beside him and whispered something. She covered her mouth and let out a small laugh. Tobias kept walking. He did not look at them. He kept his eyes on the stage, on the piano. That was the only thing that mattered, but the whispers followed him. They floated through the air like shadows. He could not hear the exact words, but he did not need to. He knew what they were saying. He had heard it all before. Who is this kid? What is he doing here? Look at his clothes. Look at his shoes. He does not belong. When he reached the front of the auditorium, he climbed the short set of stairs that led to the stage. The wood creaked slightly under his weight. The lights above were bright and warm. And for a moment, he felt like he was standing in the middle of the sun. The judges looked up at him. The woman in the center was older. maybe in her 60s. She had silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore glasses on a chain around her neck and held a pen in her hand like a weapon. The two men on either side of her were younger, but just as serious. One of them flipped through a stack of papers without looking up. The other stared at Tobiah with an expression that was impossible to read. "Name?" the woman asked. Her voice was flat. "Tobiah," he said. His voice came out quieter than he wanted. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Tobiah Williams." She glanced down at her list. "Number 147. You are the last one." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved over his too big shirt, his worn-out shoes, his empty hands. "You did not bring an instrument." "No, ma'am. I play piano." "I see." She made a small note on her paper. "And where do you study?" The question hit him like a punch. He did not study anywhere. He did not have a teacher. He did not have lessons or recitals or certificates to show. All he had was a broken piano in a community center, and an old woman who had believed in him. "I taught myself mostly," he said. "A lady at my community center helped me. Her name is Miss Ruthie." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. The man on her left let out a small sound. It might have been a sigh. It might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell. "Self-taught," the woman repeated. She wrote something else on her paper. "Very well. You may begin when you are ready." Tobiah turned and walked toward the piano. His legs felt like jelly. His hands were shaking. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room pressing against his back like invisible weights. Behind him, he heard it, a chuckle, low and quiet, but unmistakable. It came from somewhere in the audience. Then another, and another. Small sounds of amusement rippling through the seats, like stones dropped in water. He stopped walking, just for a second. The laughter wrapped around him like a cold blanket. It tried to pull him down. Tried to remind him of every time someone had told him he was not good enough. Every time someone had looked at him and seen nothing but a poor kid from the wrong side of town. But then he thought of his mother, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, leaving notes on the kitchen table because she never had time to say goodbye in person. She had sacrificed everything for him. Everything. And she had never once complained. He thought of Miss Ruthie, sitting beside him on that creaky bench, her old hands guiding his fingers across the broken keys, telling him stories about the great composers, crying the first time he played a piece all the way through without making a mistake, believing in him when no one else did. He thought of the 6 miles he had walked this morning, the blisters forming on his feet, the hunger in his stomach because he had not eaten since last night. He had come too far to turn back now. He had come too far to let their laughter stop him. He started walking again. 1 step, then another, until he was standing right in front of the piano. It was magnificent. The black surface gleamed under the lights. The keys were white and perfect, not a single chip or stain. He reached out and touched the wood gently, almost like he was afraid it might disappear. It was real. It was solid. It was waiting for him. He sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. The movement was smooth, easy, nothing like the wobbly stool he used at the community center. He placed his feet on the pedals. They felt cool against his worn shoes. He rested his hands on his lap and took a deep breath. The room had gone quiet. The chuckling had stopped. Everyone was watching him now. Waiting. Some with curiosity. Some with doubt. Some with barely hidden smirks. Expecting him to fail. He did not look at any of them. He looked at the keys. 88 of them. Stretching out before him like a road to somewhere new. Somewhere better. Somewhere he had always known he was meant to go. He closed his eyes. The world around him faded. The whispers. The stares. The fancy clothes and expensive watches. None of it mattered anymore. There was only him and the piano. Only the music that lived inside his heart, waiting to be set free. He thought of Miss Ruthie one more time. Her voice echoed in his mind, soft and steady. "You got something special, boy." Do not let anyone tell you different. He opened his eyes. He placed his fingers on the keys, and he began to play. The first note floated into the air like a whisper, soft, gentle, almost fragile. It hung in the silence for just a moment before the second note followed. Then, the third. Then the fourth. And suddenly, the music was alive. Tobias' fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for a boy his age. The opening of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1-inch G minor filled the auditorium. Each note pure and clear, as a drop of rain falling into still water. It was not the clumsy playing of a beginner. It was not the mechanical performance of someone who had simply memorized the notes. It was something else entirely. Something deeper. Something that came from a place words could not reach. The man who had chuckled earlier stopped mid-breath. His smirk melted away like snow in the sun. The woman beside him sat up straighter in her seat, her eyes wide with disbelief. All around the auditorium, people who had been whispering fell silent. People who had been checking their phones looked up. People who had been ready to leave stayed frozen in their seats, because what they were hearing did not make sense. It did not fit the picture in front of them. This boy in his faded shirt and worn-out shoes, this boy with no formal training, this boy who had walked in off the street with nothing but a number in his hand, was playing like he had been born, with music running through his veins. At the judge's table, the woman with the silver hair slowly removed her glasses. She set them down on the table and leaned forward, her sharp eyes fixed on the boy at the piano. She had been teaching and judging for over 40 years. She had heard thousands of students play, prodigies, professionals, winners of international competitions. But something about this was different. Something about this reached inside her chest and squeezed. The music swelled. Tobias' fingers danced faster now, moving through the rising passages of the ballade with stunning precision. His body swayed gently with the rhythm. Not in a showy way, but in the way of someone who was not just playing the music, but living it. His eyes were closed. His face was calm. There was no fear anymore, no doubt, only the music. He thought of his mother as he played, her tired eyes, her rough hands, the way she used to hum old songs while she folded laundry late at night. He poured all of that into the keys. The love, the gratitude, the ache of missing her, even when she was right there in the next room. He thought of Miss Ruthie, her patient voice, her warm laugh, the way she clapped her hands together like a child whenever he got a difficult passage right. He played for her, too, for every hour she had spent teaching him on that broken piano, for every time she had told him he was special when the rest of the world told him he was nothing. The music grew darker now, heavier. The middle section of the ballade was stormy and intense, filled with crashing chords and rapid runs that demanded everything a pianist had to give. Tobias did not hold back. His small hands stretched across the keys with surprising power. The notes thundered through the auditorium like waves crashing against rocks. A woman in the third row put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes glistened with tears she did not expect. She did not know this boy. She did not know his story. But somehow, the music was telling her everything. It was telling her about struggle, about loneliness, about fighting against a world that never gave you a fair chance. One of the male judges set down his pen. He had stopped writing long ago. There was nothing to critique, nothing to correct. He just sat there, listening, watching, completely still. The storm and the music began to calm. The tempo slowed. The notes became tender again, like a lullaby after a nightmare. Tobias' fingers moved gently now, coaxing soft melodies from the keys. A tear slid down his cheek, but he did not wipe it away. He did not even seem to notice. He was somewhere else. Somewhere far from this auditorium. Somewhere the music had taken him. He thought of all the nights he had practiced in his head, because he could not get to a real piano. All the times he had played on tabletops, on desks, on any flat surface he could find, imagining the keys beneath his fingers. He thought of the people who had laughed at him, the ones who had told him to give up, the ones who had looked at him and seen only what he lacked instead of what he had. And he played for them too. Not out of anger, Not out of revenge, but out of something stronger. Out of hope. Out of the belief that music could reach anyone, even those who had closed their hearts. The final section of the ballad arrived. The music built again, climbing higher and higher like a bird rising toward the sun. Tobiah's fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed. The notes tumbled over each other in a glorious rush, filling every corner of the auditorium with sound. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. It was everything he had ever felt, everything he had ever dreamed, all pouring out at once. And then, the ending. The final chords crashed down like thunder, powerful and absolute. The last note rang out, echoing through the silence that followed. Then, it faded, and there was nothing. Tobiah sat still at the piano, his hands resting on the keys, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. He did not open his eyes right away. He was afraid to. Afraid of what he might see, afraid that when he looked up, everyone would still be laughing, still be doubting, still be waiting for him to fail. But the silence stretched on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then it broke. A single person started clapping. Then another. Then another. The applause spread through the auditorium like wildfire, growing louder and louder, until it filled the entire room. People rose to their feet, not one or two, but whole rows. The man who had chuckled stood with his hands above his head, clapping harder than anyone. The woman beside him had tears streaming down her face. Tobiah finally opened his eyes. What he saw took his breath away. Everyone was standing. Everyone was clapping. The sound washed over him like a wave, warm and overwhelming. He did not know what to do. He did not know how to react, so he just sat there, staring out at the sea of faces, his heart pounding in his chest. At the judge's table, the woman with the silver hair rose slowly to her feet. She was not clapping. She was not smiling. She was simply looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Then, very slowly, she nodded, just once. A small, almost invisible gesture, but it said everything. The applause continued. 4 minutes. Maybe longer. Tobiah lost track of time. People were shouting now. Cheering. A few voices called out words like incredible, and amazing, and unbelievable, but they all blended together into one great roar of sound that filled his ears and his heart. He stood up from the bench on shaky legs. He did not know if he was supposed to bow or wave or just walk away. No one had taught him the proper etiquette for moments like this, so he simply stood there, a small boy in ill-fitting clothes, and let the applause rain down on him like the validation he had been waiting for his entire life. For the first time since he had walked into this building, he smiled. It was a real smile. Wide and bright, and full of something that felt a lot like joy. Something that felt a lot like relief. Something that felt a lot like the beginning of a brand new chapter. The chuckling had stopped. The whispers had stopped. The doubts had stopped. All that remained was the music, and the boy who had played it. The applause eventually faded. But the feeling in the room did not. Something had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The air itself seemed different, charged with an energy that had not been there before. People were looking at Tobiah in a way they had not looked at him when he first walked in. The doubt was gone. The amusement was gone. In its place was something that looked a lot like respect. The woman with the silver hair stood up from the judge's table and walked toward the stage. Her steps were slow and deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The room fell silent again as everyone watched her approach. She climbed the short stairs and stopped a few feet away from where Tobiah stood beside the piano. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Her eyes were sharp and searching, the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. She studied his face for a long moment without saying a word. Then, very slowly, she knelt down so that she was at his level. "Who taught you to play like that?" she asked. Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. Tobiah swallowed hard. "Miss Ruthie," he said. She volunteers at the community center near my home. She taught me on an old piano there. It has 14 keys that do not work. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. 14 broken keys? Yes, ma'am. So I had to learn to play around them. Miss Ruthie showed me how. Something flickered in the woman's eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been admiration. It was hard to tell. She was quiet for a moment, as if she was processing what she had just heard. And the piece you played, she continued, Chopin's Ballade. Where did you learn it? YouTube mostly, Tobiah admitted. I watched videos of people playing it. Over and over. Hundreds of times. And then I practiced. Sometimes on the piano at the center. Sometimes just in my head when I could not get there. The woman shook her head slowly. Not in disappointment, in disbelief. You learned that piece from YouTube videos and a broken piano? Yes, ma'am. She was silent again. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She smiled. It was a small smile. Barely there. But it was real. What is your name again? She asked. Tobiah. Tobiah Williams. She nodded and stood back up. She turned to face the audience, her voice rising so that everyone could hear. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance, she said. I have been the director of this academy for 23 years. In that time, I have heard thousands of young musicians audition for a place in our program. Prodigies. Competition winners. Students with years of private lessons and the finest teachers money can buy. She paused and looked back at Tobiah. But I have never, in all my years, heard anything quite like what I heard today. A murmur rippled through the audience. People exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others simply stared at the boy on the stage with new eyes. Dr. Vance continued. This young man walked into our audition with no instrument, no formal training, and no one to speak for him. He taught himself to play on a broken piano at a community center. He learned one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire from internet videos, and he performed it just now with more soul, more passion, and more raw talent than I have seen in decades. She turned back to Tobiah. Her expression was serious but kind. On behalf of the Hartwell Academy of Music, I would like to offer you a full scholarship. Tuition. Private lessons. Access to our instruments and facilities, and a living stipend for your family to help with expenses. Tobiah felt his knees go weak. He was not sure he had heard her correctly. A full scholarship? A living stipend? For him? For his mother? I do not know what to say, he managed. Say yes, Dr. Vance said simply. Yes, he whispered. Then louder. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. The audience erupted again. More applause, more cheers. People were standing and clapping all over again. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. The boy who had walked in as a nobody was walking out as something else entirely. After the audition ended, things moved quickly. Staff members surrounded Tobiah, asking him questions, taking down information, explaining what would happen next. Someone handed him a packet of papers. Someone else gave him a bottle of water. A photographer asked if they could take his picture for the Academy's newsletter. It was all overwhelming, a blur of faces and voices and handshakes. But through it all, Tobiah could only think of one person. His mother. He finally left the academy as the sun was starting to set. His feet hurt. His head was spinning. But his heart was full. He walked all 6 miles back home, just like he had walked them that morning. Only this time, everything felt different. The streets looked brighter. The air smelled sweeter. Even the sirens in the distance sounded like music. When he got home, his mother was there. She had just come back from her day job and was getting ready to leave for her night shift. She looked tired. She always looked tired, but when she saw him walk through the door, something changed in her face. "Baby, where have you been?" she asked. "I was worried sick." He did not answer right away. He just walked up to her and hugged her. Tight, like he had not hugged her in years. She was surprised at first. But then she wrapped her arms around him and held him close. "What is going on?" she asked softly. "Are you okay?" He pulled back and looked at her. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was smiling. "Mama," he said, "I got in. The music academy. They gave me a full scholarship. They are going to pay for everything. And they are going to help us. Help you, so you do not have to work so hard anymore." His mother stared at him. She did not move. She did not speak. For a moment, he was afraid she did not believe him. Then her face crumbled. Tears spilled from her eyes, and she pulled him into another hug, tighter than before. "My baby," she whispered. "My sweet, beautiful baby." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, crying together, laughing together. Two people who had been through so much, finally catching a break. The next day, Tobiah went back to the community center. Miss Ruthie was there, sitting in her usual spot near the old piano. When she saw him walk in, her face lit up. "Well, well," she said. "There is my star pupil. How did it go?" He sat down beside her and told her everything, every detail, every moment. By the time he finished, Miss Ruthie had tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "I always knew," she said quietly. "From the very first day you touched these keys, I knew you were special. I just knew." She reached out and took his hand in hers. Her fingers were old and stiff, but her grip was strong. "You did it, boy. You really did it." Word spread fast. Within a few days, local news stations picked up the story. The boy from the poor neighborhood, the broken piano, the 6-mile walk, the standing ovation. It was the kind of story people wanted to hear. The kind of story that reminded them that dreams could still come true. The video of his audition went viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People from all over the world watched this 12-year-old boy in his faded shirt and worn-out shoes sit down at a grand piano and play like his life depended on it. And in the years that followed, Tobiah kept playing. He studied at the academy. He won competitions. He performed at concert halls across the country. And on the night before his 18th birthday, he stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall in New York City, looked out at the packed audience, and played the same piece he had played at his audition 6 years earlier. Chopin's Ballade. No one. In the front row sat his mother, wearing a new dress for the first time in years. Beside her sat Miss Ruthie, older now but still smiling, still clapping, still believing. And in that moment, Tobiah understood something important. Talent does not care where you come from. Dreams do not ask for permission, and sometimes, the kid everyone laughs at turns out to be the one who changes everything.